Neonic Void Productions presents.
We're going to jump right in. Hi, welcome to Spookocalypse, where I'm your host, Zio. And today I am joined with, of course, the one, the only, the icon and legend, Bunyip.
Well, yes, I am also here.
So to get into the housekeeping, housekeeper is still MIA. Girl, we miss you. If you look in the description below, you'll see a link to the link tree to the other Neonic Void Productions family of podcasts, as well as the YouTube channel. If you're on YouTube, hi, how are you? Please subscribe. Please click that click button and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to follow us on Twitter, because I'm not going to call it by that stupid ass name, go follow us at Spookocalypse. That's SPOOKOCALYPSE, baby. Yeah, go follow us on the other podcast as well for if you want to listen to some D&D. This is we're on episode 4 of campaign 2. Or if you want to go listen to books, let's talk about books over at the Book Watchers. Go do that. I've talked about some horror books, and Jacob just got finished doing, well, a couple weeks back, we were doing the Wheel of Time series. He was going through the whole series of Wheel of Time, and went through books 1 through 9. And now we're just waiting for him to finish 10 through 14. We can talk about the rest of that. But in the meantime, I'm going to be talking about more books on there on my turn. But anyway, we're not at Book Watchers, but all that will be in the description below. Please give us a follow, give us a listen on the other shows. Give them some love too. So there'll be a mint on the Palo Taste flavor. Mint is electric raspberry.
Electric raspberry, yeah.
Electric
Something
raspberry.
sour.
Something sour and electrifying, baby. Why, you may ask? Well, buckle up, because we're talking about another universal monster today. What? Is there a theme? Possibly for the next 2 months, we're going to be doing classic monster films from the Universal family of films. So today we're going to be talking about Frankenstein. Woo! But tell us about some of the background production history of Frankenstein.
Okay,
The director, all that stuff.
Yeah, this was directed by James Whale, based on the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
Yeah, it's Queen.
It was an 1818 novel, but there was also a play in 1927 by Peggy Webling and John L. Balderston. It is starring Colin Clive, May Clark, John Bowles, Boris Karloff, who plays the monster, and then some familiar names such as Dwight Fry and Edward Van Sloan, who were in Dracula just like half a year before, because that was made in February. This was made in November of the same year. We also got Frederick Kerr as another. Hang on. Frederick played Baron Frankenstein. That's Henry's dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they changed some of the names of the characters because
They
I
did.
thought it was Victor Frankenstein and Igor and not Henry and Fritz.
Yeah, they did change some of the names.
I was gonna say, like, that's pretty much the production history, other than it made $12 million at the box office.
Yes, on a $262,007 budget. And of course, the movie was released November 21st, 1931. And it's only 70 minutes long. It's an hour and 10 minutes, y'all. This is a very short movie. And it doesn't even go over the whole book. Honestly, it kind of stops like halfway through. Well, the story of the Frankenstein movie is literally maybe half of the book, maybe.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
mention like the trip to the north in in either Antarctica. Yeah, I was like, did they go to Antarctica or just the North Pole? I don't remember.
I think he went to Antarctica. I think that's where the monster went.
Also, how he's portrayed by Boris Karloff, it's like he just looks like a monster, but in the book he's more charismatic. Like he can speak and he's
Yeah.
like somewhat intelligent.
Yes, most certainly. Um, I have, of course, the original. I have the book somewhere, but I also have again, like I was saying last week with the manga classics. You want an interesting way to read some of these stories of these classic books, like Dracula and Frankenstein. They have a manga version of Frankenstein as well. It's great. It's fucking fantastic. And the way they draw the Frankenstein monster in this is quite interesting. Like he has a buff arm, a very smaller, like a smaller arm. He looks more like a mismatch um puzzle pieces of like different body parts, like he's supposed to be. But the way they designed him makes it look more that than the movie or some of the other adaptations of Frankenstein. But yeah, this movie takes place it's pretty much it's the first half or so of the book. Because I know in the original story it ends with I think it ends with Frankenstein getting the bride, which of course the Bride of Frankenstein would be. I have not watched The Bride of Frankenstein yet. That's on our list of films to do. So I have no idea if The Bride of Frankenstein is technically the other half of the film, or the other half of the story of Frankenstein, or if it's kind of its own thing. So that will be to be determined when we talk about The Bride of Frankenstein. But let's get into it. So we are taking place in a village in the northern part of Germany, in a state that's known as the uh, Bavarian Alps,
Yeah, like
where
Bavaria, pretty much.
Bavarian, yeah, Bavarian Alps, where we meet Henry Frankenstein, which I'm sorry, it should be Victor, but whatever, because I think Victor sounds better than Henry. Henry Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz, which would be Igor. I don't know why they changed the names like this, but okay. Where they're piecing together a human body. Some parts are freshly buried, and some body parts are recently hanged criminals. Like he's literally just taking a bunch of random body parts and putting them together in a laboratory inside of a watchtower. Henry, of course, desires to create a human because let me tell you something. Mary Shelley wrote this book off the idea, what is the scariest thing I can think of? A man being God, playing God. That's not terrifying to you. I don't know what is, because she's right. So Henry desires to create a human being with his bare hands and giving this body life through electrical devices and electricity. And he still needs a brain for this creation to be whole. So at a nearby school, he gets in contact with his former teacher, Dr. Wildman, who's showing his class the brain of an average human being and the corrupted brain of a criminal for comparison. Henry then sends Fritz, God, I really want to say Igor, to steal the healthy brain from his class. I want to say Victor and Igor so bad, but I can't because I don't want to confuse everybody. Um, Fritz,
And the brains are just left out, like, "I'm gonna leave these out for the students to just poke and look
ex-
at." And then
exactly.
barely a minute after they leave, Fritz slips in and he picks up the normal brain. He hears a sound and drops it. He's like, "Uh-oh." And he
And
grabs
then
the
he brings him the corrupt brain
yeah.
instead. Damn,
Oh, man, that is straight out of Young Frankenstein.
it is. And then we jump over to Henry's fiance Elizabeth as he speaks with their friend Victor. You named the friend Victor, really, really choices. So Elizabeth speaks with their friend Victor about the scientists. Oh God, I've lost my train of thought.
The scientist?
Oh yeah, she's talking about the scientist's actions and his seclusion, basically, whatever. They're having a conversation about some shit. And then Elizabeth and Victor go to ask Wildman for help understanding Henry's weird behavior, because they were talking about how he's kind of secluded to himself and how he's just kind of strange lately. The doctor reveals that he's aware that Henry wishes to create life. And of course, concerned for Henry, they arrive at his lab just as he makes his final preparations the lifeless body for the lifeless body on the operating table as a storm rages around in the village. From there, Henry then invites Elizabeth and the others to watch him bring life to the body. Henry and Fritz again raise the operating table up towards the opening at the top of the tower, like you typically would think of when you think of Dr. Frankenstein with
just like Frankenhooker.
Just like Frankenhooker, just like Van Helsing when Dracula did that, when he tried to raise his babies up with Frankenstein's monster. Yeah, raise up the table up to a lightning storm and hope lightning strikes it. And I love Frankenhooker so bad. I saw a video clip on TikTok about Frankenhooker with all the sex workers exploding.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh no, I know what this is from. I still can't get past the fact that the actress said, "Oh my God, are you and your boyfriend? Are you two brothers?"
She thought you were brothers.
She did. I am mortified. And when she found out, she was mortified. Oh, girl, yeah. I love you, ma'am. You are amazing. You were great in that movie, but I never wanted to jump off a cliff so bad. It was funny. It was traumatizing, but it was funny. God. But no, found that. But yeah, this reminded me of like Frankenhooker with the whole lightning storm, bringing life, all that. It was great. Because of course Frankenhooker is a parody of Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein. If you haven't watched it, please go listen back to the episode of Frankenhooker on this podcast. It's great. We have a lot of fun on that one. So back to the storm. So they raise up the operating table to the storm, and the creature and Henry's equipment are exposed to the lightning storm as it's empowered, bringing the creature to life. Because that's how it works. So then Frankenstein's monster, despite its grotesque form, seems to be an innocent, childlike creation. Henry welcomes it into his lab and asks it to take a seat, which it does. He then opens up the roof, causing the monster to reach out towards the sunlight. Then Fritz enters in with a flaming torch and scares the shit out of the monster, which is real smart. Fritz has a weird thing with this monster. He tries to scare him or set him on fire, but it's just like, dude, stop messing with the monster. You're going to get fucked up. And what happens? He does.
Torments it.
He does. He has this weird tormenting thing going on. So he attacks the monster. He frightens the monster, and its fright is mistaken by Henry and Wildman with the torch. Hearing Fritz screaming in the dungeon, they run down there, finding that the monster was forcibly, Fritz is kind of hanging out, if you catch my drift. So he's dead. The monster lingers at the two, but they lock him in, monster inside, realizing the monster must be destroyed.
I just thought of an alternate way to phrase hanging, levitating by his cranium.
Yes, yeah, Fritz was levitating. Let's keep it safe. Yes, Fritz was hanging by how did you put it? But yeah,
levitating by his cranium.
Levitating by his cranium. Yes. From that point, the monster lunges at the two, but they lock the monster inside and they realize, oh shit, we have to kill this thing. So Henry does what Henry does and prepares a powerful drug, and the two conspire to release the monster and inject it as it attacks. When the door is unlocked, the monster lunges at Henry, and they both eventually, they inject the drug into the monster's back, and the monster falls to the floor unconscious. Then We jump to Henry collapses from exhaustion, and Elizabeth and Henry's father take him home. Henry is, of course, worried about the monster, but Feldman reassures him that he will destroy it. While Henry is at home recovering and preparing for his wedding, the doctor examines the monster as he prepares to basically kill it. The monster strangles him. It escapes from the tower, wanders through the landscape, encountering the young farmer's daughter, Maria. This is the part of the movie I should not have laughed at, but something about it made me laugh. I'm going to hell for this. So she asks the monster to play a game with her, in which they toss flowers into the lake. And she's like, "Oh, I can make a boat with these flowers." She's flowing the flowers into the lake and the flowers float. So the monster, of course, he enjoys the game. And then when he runs out of flowers, he's like, "Oh my God, the flowers float. You must float too." Because that's the only thing you can think of when you look at him, because he can't say anything. But that's like the train of thought you kind of that you're thinking he's going about. So he picks her up and throws her into the lake. And I laughed way more than I should have. Because not for the fact that he killed her, but for the fact that like it was so it's the way it's shot. It's so it's so dumb. He's like, oh, he picks her up and just tosses her in there like a sack of potatoes. And I'm like, the fuck? It's so fucking dumb. And I'm like, no, Maria.
I find it interesting that most of his killings are not really done too much out of malice. It's more out of not knowing his
Accident.
strength. And yeah, because
Yeah,
like his brain is labeled as abnormal, but he just acts childlike. So that makes me wonder
exactly.
what kind of quote unquote criminal or abnormal brain was in that lab that they like who did they take it from?
Right.
What condition
Right.
did that person have that let Frankenstein's monster act the way that he does?
Exactly. But he unfortunately, she does drown in the after Frankenstein throws her in, which first off, he didn't even throw her in that deep into a what I would think would be a deep part of the lake. So I'm like, how deep was the water? We'll never know. So she drowned, and then the preparations of the wedding are completed, and Henry is happy with Elizabeth. They marry as soon as the doctor arrives, and Victor rushes in saying the doctor was found strangled. And Henry's like, "Oh fuck, the monster." The monster then enters Elizabeth's room, causing her to scream while people start crowding around the place that they're in, the house or whatever, and they're calling for the monster, the death of the monster, because they killed a child.
Yeah, like
Um,
when the little girl's dad arrives, he's carrying her body and he's just staring straight forward with his mouth open, just like, I can't believe
Everyone's
this is
already
happening.
freaking out with pitchforks and torches, and he hasn't said a word. So I'm like, how does everyone know what's going on when he hasn't said shit? He's been blank face, not blinking, just carrying his
I
child.
really like that scene because like everyone's having a celebration and they see something's wrong, and then like the music steadily stops and people stop
Yeah.
talking and then they follow him.
Yeah,
And
they
then
just follow him, and you're like, how do they know?
yeah, and all the murders that happened beforehand was
Yeah.
just like no one knew about it, so there wasn't too many high stakes. But then now it's like everybody knows because he shows up and it's like, "What's all this rock? Like, what's all the ruckus?" And he's like, "Someone killed my daughter," and it's like, "Oh no, who do you think it was? Probably that monster that Frankenstein made." And you're like, "Oh shoot." All right, you guys go this one direction, y'all guys go this second direction, and then I'm gonna lead the third party to this way. Let's bring in some bloodhounds
And
to
it
track
was
them down too.
quite funny because when they came into Elizabeth's room thinking the worst, she's on the bed. She's like, oh, oh, oh. Classic Hollywood damsel in distress. Oh, oh my God. Oh, he's a monster. Oh. pass
He
out.
gently placed me on the bed.
I was like, yes, queen drama. Give us the drama,
He
mama.
was an utter gentleman, but he looked hideous, and it's like, "Wha that counts as monsters to you?"
Apparently so. So from there, of course, Maria's father comes in with a baby. They all split up, and the mob, they form a mob to try to capture the monster. During in which the Henrys then attacked by the monster. The monster knocks Henry unconscious and carries him to an old windmill. The peasants hear that the creatures took Henry there, and he's climbing to the top of it. And the monster hurls the scientist to the ground from the top of the windmill. He just chucks him. It's funny because you could tell it's a dummy, but he just chucks it. I'm like, damn. And then he hits the windmill, and then the windmill, as it's still propelling, that's when he falls to the ground again, and he's fine. And I'm like, girl, he would not be fine. He hit that windmill hard, and then he fell to the ground. I was like, what the fuck? And then from there, the villagers basically set the windmill on fire. And the monster is trapped inside of the burning windmill with nowhere to escape. Dun dun dun. And then we jump back to Castle Frankenstein, where Henry's father celebrates the wedding of his recovered son with a toast to a future grandchild. And that is where the movie ends. Is that an abrupt, weird ending? Yes. Yes, it is.
It
They
totally
should just end in the movie with Frankenstein in the windmill with nowhere to escape and have a final shot of the windmill. They didn't need that last line from Henry's father, oh, grandchild. That was weird.
Yeah, because 2 things that made me question that scene. Number 1, when he's, like, about to go into the room to check on her, so he's like, "Oh, he doesn't need the, wine right now," and I thought that meant that he was dead, and he just didn't wanna outright say it, but then also, he was like, "Here's to our future grandchild." It's almost like, well, it was bad of him to create life without a woman, but now that he's marrying Elizabeth, here's to our future grandchild created the quote unquote natural way.
Yeah. But that is the plot of Frankenstein. Now, again, this is not the full story of the novel because the novel continues on after this, technically. And obviously, there is some big differences between the novel and the movie. So, but we'll go more into that when we talk about the Bride of Frankenstein in a couple weeks. Then we'll go more into that. But symbolism for Frankenstein.
Well, I do see why it's sometimes referred to as the modern day Prometheus,
Yeah.
because the original Prometheus was like, I'm going to just steal some fire from Olympus and show humans how to use it, and then get punished for it later. But then Frankenstein, the doctor, creates his own little thing where it's like, I'm going to give basically, it's like fire was like a way of giving life to humanity. And then this was Frankenstein's way of giving life to a new creature, but then he gets punished for it later.
Yeah.
So I see the parallels.
Yeah.
I think in the Queer for Fear documentary, they did mention how this movie also has gay symbolism, but I don't quite remember all they pointed out.
With this one, I'm trying to think. 'Cause I don't know if they necessarily talked about the film itself, but they're more talking about how Mary Shelley is a queer woman and how this movie and how this kind of story talks about the basically men a man with a god complex is the scariest thing to her and a lot of people, as I mean, a man playing God. Now, as far as like the gayness of Frankenstein, I guess you could put it as I don't know, because I don't remember them talking about the story itself, more so about Mary and how she came up with the.
Yeah, and I guess who would be the gay character then? Frankenstein himself or his creation?
Hmm.
And in fact, if there was symbolism, it was harder to see in this film. And I'm
Yeah, it wasn't
thinking,
as obvious as like Dracula.
plus he spends a lot of time in that lap of his, and is kind of like not as interested in
Yeah.
Elizabeth most of the time.
Yeah, unless it's like Fritz or Igor and
Even then,
Frankenstein.
even then, he's not that into Fritz. He's more like, "You're my assistant, just do your job."
Yeah. 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 Pretty much. Um, I mean, Frankenstein or the modern day Prometheus is a fabulous story. So if you have not read it, please do yourself a favor and do it. This is the story that gave us science fiction as well as horror. The mother of horror, Mary Shelley. Mother of horror and science fiction, Mary Shelley. But yeah, do yourself a favor, read the book. It's great. You got time to read between now and The Bride of Frankenstein in a couple weeks. So no excuses, ladies and gentlemen. Go read it. Go read the book. Do yourself a favor. It's fun. It's great. I actually kind of like Frankenstein a little more than Dracula as far as the original story goes. Even though I do love Dracula and how it's written like a bunch of journal entries, I find that fun. But Frankenstein has my heart a little bit more. So, rating system. 1 out of 5. Uh,
Floating flowers?
1 out of 5 floating flowers. Yes. Okay. I will give this a 4 out of 5 floating flowers. I liked Frankenstein. I liked this movie. I it's the black and white works well with it. This movie didn't really drag on that much. It kind of got to the point. Granted, they only had 70 minutes for it, so you couldn't have you didn't really have as much drag out time. So it kind of got to the point and what was going on. It didn't really drag too much, in my opinion. Um, the monster's great. The iconic design of Frankenstein's monster that we have today is from this movie, as well as like the iconic scene of him throwing the girl in the lake and all of that is this movie's great. It's just as iconic as Dracula when it comes to the OG Universal monsters and monster films in general. Yeah, that's my rating. 4 out of 5 floating flowers.
Interesting. I'm going for the 3.5.
Wow, we went opposites. Okay, bet.
Okay, so it did have some parts where it did feel like it dragged on for me personally,
Mhm.
but I definitely enjoyed like the grave digging scene because like it's at the very beginning and they've just dug a grave for somebody, and then as soon as one of the funeral people leave after burying the body, they're like they just immediately show us like, okay, start digging. And they spend
Right.
all of a sundown digging them up, and they put the coffin a into a carriage, and they just or a wagon, and they just carry it off. And then they have this body that was again levitating by its cranium near a post. He's like, "Yeah, it's still there." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "What did you do with this guy? How did he get there? How'd you know about him?" So it gave a little bit of "I Sell the Dead" vibes,
Yeah.
at least in that grave digging part. Yeah, and then when it comes to experimentation, like all the highlights are good highlights. It's mainly when they're just talking and there's not a whole lot happening. That's when it drags on a little bit. And definitely that scene of the father carrying his drowned daughter through the town is a strong scene.
Yes. Very much so.
And I did find it interesting that when it came to the cast, they kept Boris Karloff's casting a secret because they
Yeah.
just say the monster is like question mark, and then 30 minutes in, you see him in the makeup, and I'm like, oh my god! And I guess at the time, if you recognize Boris, you'd be like, oh, I know who that is.
Yeah.
And then they're at the end of the movie, they show the cast list again, and then they confirm it's Boris Karloff. Um, I think personally for me, I wish it had followed the book a little more closely, and that's why I rated Dracula a little higher because it felt closer in that regard. But with Frankenstein, it didn't feel it tied in as closely to the original source material.
That's fair. That's fair because I only went about half of the book roughly. I mean, the movie doesn't follow the book exactly either, so I'm saying roughly because it's kind of the like somewhat midway point because it honestly, yeah, I didn't tell the whole story technically. So
Mhm. But yeah, for those main reasons, I'd say I'd give it a 3.5.
all right. So again, it's 3.75, ladies and gentlemen. Go watch Frankenstein. It's great. It's great. I think this one's also on YouTube.
It is.
Yes, it is. It is on YouTube as well for free with ads. So do yourself a favor and go watch it or pick up and read the book Frankenstein and Modern Day Prometheus for yourself before we get to Bride of Frankenstein, because that's going to be 3 weeks from now.
Yeah, and talk about it on Reading Rainbow.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm gonna go more into the differences between the two movies and the story when we talk about the bride. But that's in a couple weeks. So right now you may be asking, oh my God, what are we gonna do next week? We're gonna do another Universal monster. If you kind of get the vibe that we're throwing down, we're doing these in order. So it's not gonna be hard to figure out which one we're gonna do next. Just look up Universal Classic Monsters and see the order and you could figure it out before we do it. So if you want to find out what we're doing next week, which monster we're going to talk about, catch us then. Until then, peace out.
Goodbye.